Hello and good morning and afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. I'm excited to be hosting this and going through these slides with you all. Today's session is Becoming Risk Resilient to Future-Proof Your Business. And just want a quick reminder, our session today is a part of a webinar series called Business Resilience in All Times. Throughout the series, our intention is to give you all information and thought leadership that will support your global enterprises through COVID-19, the pandemic, the crisis, and far beyond. We have over 20 webinars planned in the series that fall into three basic categories, as you see here in the slide. Today, we are presenting part of the middle circle there, the Enterprise Solution Series. This provides perspectives on IT technologies and solutions that will help enterprises recraft their digital strategies in light of the pandemic. There are also some other webinar series planned forthcoming. We also have the Next Normal series. This is brought to us by our colleagues at Orange Silicon Valley, and this is to share Silicon Valley perspectives on new consumer behaviors, societal changes, market opportunities, and emerging threats. And then the other series is to the far right is Leading with Partners. These are interviews from Orange over with our technology leaders such as HPE Aruba, Checkpoint, Cisco, and the advisory firm ISG. That series will also highlight new emerging trends, new solutions, and insights. Excellent. So with that, let's move on to the agenda for today. So again, welcome. Appreciate your time today. We have 45 minutes on the docket. We broke it out into two parts. 30 minutes, we'll go into, again, the risk resiliency and future-proofing your business. We'll have three subtopics there. Number one, the challenging landscape. So I'll talk about just some of the challenges and a recap of what we're all seeing and witnessing today. Two, we'll discuss resiliency characteristics. I'll go through 5 different characteristics that really will help focus organizations to, again, become more risk resilient. And then we'll get into a little more detail on what are some of those key enablers and outcomes. The enablers we've broken out into a couple of different areas. We'll talk some technology enablers, some business enablers, and then organizational and process enablers as well. Then at the end, we'll have some Q&A as well. Also within the presentation, I'm joined here by Ferris Saka. He's our pre-sale solution partner. He'll also be and he'll stop every now and then. We'll have a couple questions. So please, if you do have any questions, don't be afraid to enter them into the question space down below, the Livestorm app. And with that, let's get going. Excellent. So first, just a quick recap of where we are today. Ultimately, all organizations across all industries are on high alert, right? There's way too many to focus, so I'm just going to call out a couple, maybe 2 or 3 here for reference. So first, retail and consumer goods. Obviously, that one has been significantly impacted here in North America and throughout the world. The focus on convenience and safety and the impact on physical locations has been paramount for companies to figure out and rethink what they need to do to ensure that their consumers are safe as they transact. Also, this heightened consideration in this sector, in this industry, around relocalization of production operations, right? Where is it viable? How do we get that shipped? And then underlying that, supply chain issues as well. Another vertical and sector that's been impacted significantly is industrial manufacturing. On the manufacturing side, very simply, operations has been put to a halt for many, many organizations. Many markets have to protect their plant workers, and they don't really have a viable way for providing and delivering these services remotely. Also, on the industrial side, there's been a global collapse for industrial products, and that's further impacted the sector. Another key vertical that I'd like to talk about is oil and gas. Clearly and obviously, with nobody moving, nobody traveling around, in the economic slowdown, it's been significantly dropped the demand, right? Prospects of weak oil demands in futures and outlooks isn't looking that well either. Further to this, again, with a lot of the focus on remote workspaces and reduced business travel, that sector is trying to figure out what to do next. Bottom line, regardless of the sector, no matter what country you're in or industry or sector, no matter the company you work for, the executive team that supports you, the individual leadership you have around you, none of these things are immune to the COVID-19 impact and consequences. And further to that, the other thing I'd like to point out here is no strategy that was defined yesterday will survive and be fully intact for tomorrow. So all organizations face clear choices that will be tougher and that will be more complex to handle. So then kind of rolling up a little bit here on the next slide to really get into, if we look across all these different verticals and industries, many companies have very common themes of challenges. So at the very top, customer context, clearly and most importantly, understanding your customer, how they're changing, how has this world and the pandemic and just this evolving change impacted them, and understanding that. Has that changed what you need to do and how you need to deliver your services, right? How they consume the services. Also, has it impacted their budgets, right? As budgets have been shifted, again, because of just, the change in the economy here, what does that mean and how do they deliver the services? Also, there's an understanding of what the future looks like and the challenge there around the customers becoming more and more uncertain. Moving down to workplace and production, clearly there's really three key drivers here. Remote working, how do you handle that? How do you enable that? Do you have the right collaboration tools, right? I know for the past 3 to 4 months, I've been on video conference calls constantly, on audio web conferences constantly as well. And so, looking at and understanding what those collaboration tools are and how to best utilize them is more and more important as well. And then security behind all this. So as your workplace and production changes, how do you put and wrap around a broader, larger security strategy for that? Right in the middle of the slide, you'll see competitiveness. This is also very important, right? So what you did historically and what your market is doing and the approach to market has changed. So how do you stay competitive? Are the services that you deliver today also credible for tomorrow? Do you need to revisit that? Are there, disruptors, change makers, if you will, right, that also want to challenge you in your services and take away some of your client base, right, and take away your revenue? Also behind competitiveness is you need to look at and understand customer relationship, right? What does it mean for your organization to have a strong relationship? How do you understand experience, client experience, user experience, operational experience, many different realms of experience? We'll get into that later. Digital infrastructure, very, very important as well. A lot of organizations are going through some digital transformation and they have these conundrums. First, how do you balance between low cost and premium services and solutions, right? What is that striking balance? Secondly, as you're digitizing infrastructure, there's a change in experts and there's gaps in the expertise that is needed. How do you fill in those gaps? Also in the infrastructure, as you're evolving and as you're changing and as you're moving towards a cloud or software defined, right? That impacts your types of suppliers. So we need to understand what we need to do to manage and improve and make sure I have the right supplier ecosystem. And then lastly in this slide, you'll see at the very bottom there, financial and strategic shifts. This is all about flexibility, right? Understanding what those shifts are, having the right insights and analytics, and then looking at what do I need to do to shift operations, production, services. Maybe I need new business models. And then, there's also with this, there's a huge gap between strategy and data and the collection of data and how does that data map back to the strategy you have. So these 5 areas are very, very prevalent across all companies. If we move on to the next slide. So what I'll get into now is the return phase. And this is really, from McKinsey, they've called out different phases of responding back to, and enabling your organizations to be prepared and return from, the horrors of COVID-19. And right now they're saying we're in the return phase. And commonly what we're seeing is these 4 critical things that organizations are starting to address today, which is important. Number 1, top left corner as you see, supply chain disruption. Most industries are right now looking at how do they best reactivate their supply chains. And they're rethinking what supply chains do they have? Is what they had today working for the future? And is it working across all geographies? So if you have distribution in one country or you have products manufactured in another country and supply chains halted, maybe we need to look at different options and alternatives. Top right, digitalization. That's really about companies best understanding what assets they have, right? Whether it's resources, whether it's inventory, it's understanding their partner ecosystems and their various platforms. And it's also, again, looking at new business models to be able to develop and capture new revenue, right? This is a great opportunity for new work streams to be created for us to think differently. On the bottom left there, you'll see scale back. That's really all about, C-levels truly reassessing what they have in their business systems and building a plan for contingency and actions to be able to return their business to an effective production pace and scale. And then obviously bottom right, all this is wrapped under cost controls. So with revenues and margins plummeting during the crisis, cost pressures on IT continue to increase. So what we need to do and what we need to understand is how do we find some short-term cost reductions to mitigate those effects. So that's really the problem statement. So let's move on to the next slide here. And this is really where the webinar, I think, starts to think differently, right? So for me, and for Orange, what we've seen is resilient organizations share very common characteristics, right? So what I'll do is I'll go through these characteristics a little bit briefly here, but then I'll go into much more depth through the rest of the presentation. And ultimately what this is this is taking the next step. So I just talked about the return phase. Now what we're looking at is how do we take return and reimagine, right? This is a compelling time for us to understand and rethink, right? Now that we have the opportunity, now that we've had all this disruption, right? Let's rethink and reimagine what we can do, how we can better embrace the future, how we can transform what the organization needs to do, right? So let me briefly go through these 5 areas. So in the orange circle, you'll see there, agile and learning organizations. That is absolutely paramount. It's ultimately about looking forward. Companies need to have these T-shaped professionals, right? They need to have depth of related skills and expertise in a single field, but they also need to be able to collaborate across disciplines. And this calls for many different ways to approach the organization, to collaborate, to understand, to evolve, and to ultimately do what you're not doing today. Then if we move over to the left a little, or sorry, to the right a little bit, you'll see in the blue circle, customer centricity and brand empathy. Ultimately, this is about understanding that, yes, digital transformation continues to accelerate. It's the time to build upon it. It's the time to be able to take quick IT initiatives and move differently around the customer journey path, right? As we have more and more contact lists requirements, we need to think differently on what the client needs, what the client wants, what our brand delivers, and the empathy behind that, right? Are we understanding of their needs? Are we supportive of their needs? And what does that look like? Cost and control, to the right a little bit there, and intelligence. Ultimately, this is, again, how do we invest? How do we invest intelligently, right? How do we introduce innovative capabilities? And then how do we drive and better define creative economies of scale, whether it's better managing the infrastructure, whether it's moving to the cloud, whether it's consolidating suppliers. Ultimately, there's many different things we can do, but it's really being able to put a focused effort on cost and control. Then down the bottom, increase business efficiency. It's truly about adjusting rapidly as businesses fluctuate, when there's changing business structures, looking at things like as-a-service models, cloud services, better ways of working, remote working, etc. And then the last major characteristic you'll see there in the purple circle, the pink circle, little colorblind today, the pink circle is security and privacy by design. And this is navigating through the entire cyber threat landscape, right? As you're changing, as this world's evolving, as these sectors are evolving, the threat landscape is increased, right? It's drastically changed. And so you really need to look at security for security's sake, right? Putting security first, baking that into your design and into what you're delivering so that, when you deliver a new service to market, when you're trying to migrate your service capabilities or your infrastructure, right? You have underpinning that, that privacy and security. So regardless of what's coming into your ecosystem, right, you're ready for that and you can manage it and control it. Okay, so let me move on. And so what I'm going to do now is what you'll see through the rest of the presentation is this kind of format, right? So I'll take each of those characteristics and I'll just break down a little bit. So you see on the left, the circle, ultimately there's some key enablers. And then after that, I'll talk about some of the business outcomes. So the first characteristic I talked about a little bit, and that's about how to become an agile learning organization. Ultimately, as it says in the subheadline, it's fostering a culture of business intelligence and adaptation, right? And so what we need to do is we first need to look and understand what are some of the key challenges that organizations have. And so first, they need to figure out how do they scale back up to normal operations. They need to understand what is normal operations, right? That has changed, and so that's important to understand. They also need to understand, very importantly, how do they keep their employees safe, right? There's a new landscape on what is the office, what does the LAN environment look like, what does working in the office look like, what is the office actually to an organization, right? There's also being introduced other challenges like new regulations around, how you actually work within an office, temperature, air quality, occupancy, protocols are being put in place, right? So a lot of challenges. Ultimately, from an enabling perspective, yeah, we've called out 4 of them here. So first, you'll see close to the number 1 there, co-innovation, right? This is a time when we can look at not only what we're doing internally, but we can look to our partners, right? We can look to our extended ecosystem to co-innovate together, right? How do we take what we're doing, extend it, and utilize our strong, robust ecosystems and create new emerged capabilities and offerings and services, right? Co-innovation is an excellent way to do that, to be able to combine and converge that, right? Also user adoption, right? So as you have this new working environment for organizations, understanding how your users are actually adopting the services, right? Are there certain training programs? Are there certain elements of activity where the users have direct feedback, right? Are there ways to provide surveys and understand what the needs are and have they transformed? Right. Workspace services, again, I'll go into a little bit more on some other slides later, but workspace services is also very critical. The workspace has changed completely, right? I'm at home. I have a new work office. This is now a workspace. How does Orange and how does your company manage and secure me while I'm working, right? Then data and analytics. So as your organization is growing and as it's learning, how are you actually harnessing all that information? How are you taking that information and then making suggestions, making recommendations, being more predictive of what is forthcoming, and then execute and implement that. So I move on to the next slide here. What you'll see will be the outcomes, right? So if we start to embrace those enablers, then we'll do things like design thinking, right? Very, very valuable method, right? A lot of organizations are starting to embrace this. A lot of universities are training this as well. A lot of business schools as well. Really, design thinking, knowledge sharing starts with, first, human-centered, right? How do we solve a problem? No longer is it solving an IT problem, a technical problem, the right answer. It's how do we solve the human-centered issue and then support that with people, processes, and tools, right? So it's creating those scenarios and it's ultimately building knowledge and then delivering against things like what are the recommendations I should have, right? So there are required moves I should be making. There are no-brainer moves. There are some big bets we should be placing, contingent moves, right? Small satellite moves that couple together with other moves. But ultimately, it's harnessing all that information, right? Creating these scenarios, creating these use cases, and then problem resolving them. Move down to number 2. So it's about retraining and evolving our skills today towards higher demand areas with different career paths, right? So the days of just being one single vertical or one single architecture domain for a lot of organizations is over, right? So we still need to have experts, but we also need to figure out what are the new waves of technology, what are those disruptors that an organization needs to be embarking towards, and then building a training program, right? And then building a skill development and career pathways so your organization is moving towards the future, but also so that your teammates, right, and the users and the members of the organization, they understand what they're doing and then they're incented, right, and they feel satisfied and comfortable with this changing career path. Number 3, and the key outcome here too when you embrace all those elements is continuous improvement culture. Failure is a learnable experience, right? You may hear the saying, you need to fail fast, fail quick, and learn from that. It's good to fail. If you're not failing, you're not learning, you're not growing, you're not evolving. And then lastly, it's about agility, right? How do you bring agility to the way the teams are working and improving productivity? It's connecting all those things together, right? It's giving them different tools, different avenues for collaboration, whether it be video, conferencing, Teams, WebEx, you name it, right? There's many different, multitude of different tools, survey polls, etc. And so it's pulling all that together for organization. Okay, so moving down to the next section here. This topic is about how do I increase my business efficiency? And it's going to be 2 major areas I think that we want to pinpoint on and drill down into. So first, it's about that remote working and driving that continuous collaboration I just referenced a moment ago. So a lot of different challenges here. I don't need to go through them. I think what I really want to do is jump into some of the answers and what are some of the key enablers here. So first, as we're trying to drive more remote working, cloud connectivity. So how do we deliver flexible, adjustable bandwidth, within hours or minutes? So when I have applications and workloads going to different area, different source, going to the cloud, right? I can flex with that. Remote access, also very important. So secure remote access, many options out there today, right? So like Cisco AnyConnect, Juno's Pulse, Zscaler. Ultimately, it's having a remote access. But further, what we're seeing as another trend is not just about remote access, but things like multi-factor authentication, right? So really assuring and taking that extra step of security to ensure that the people that need to get into your environment, onto your network, and into your applications are the people you want into your applications. Also, application virtualization, now that I'm mentioning it, the word applications. So virtualization of applications and how your organization accesses those tools, right, and those critical applications has become more and more important. So how do you secure connecting and leveraging internal applications, right? Looking at technologies, things like VMware or Citrix, XenApps, or Microsoft Azure. But it's basically putting your applications, in the right position and posture for your organization. Then lastly, VDI. So, this has been around a while, but I think it's an, underutilized and undervalued technology. So it's truly desktop as a service. It's bringing back standardization. Again, if you have more and more people working in different paths, in offices, at home, different learning booths and areas, et cetera, it's bringing standardization. So, when they're connected, you're delivering them a consistent user experience, right? You're easing management and you're ensuring security. And then bottom there, you'll see collaboration tools, also very important. So it's a lot of organizations have different tooling, but I think a further focus on how do you pull all those tools together, right? So you have audio conferencing solutions. How do you allow teams to work in clusters and small teams? How do projects continue to go on and collaborate in a different manner than they did when they were face-to-face? And then ultimately, looking at ways of running different virtual events, town halls, corporate-wide virtual events, is now the norm, right? Many different, if you look at the market today, right, a lot of conferences that were in person are now virtual. A lot of organizations should be looking at that and embracing that as the new way to disseminate our information, to provide updates, right, and to engage with partners in the broader ecosystem. Then we talk about the outcomes on this next slide here. Ultimately, it's really simple. So it's the possibility to work anywhere at any time, and then leveraging and utilizing the applications that are important for you, right? Making sure your business services and business processes are running by leveraging the applications that generate the revenue for your organization, right? Unleashing project organization, engagement, productivity, straightforward and simple, right? Just continue focus there. Enhancing collaboration across geographies. And ultimately, there's a significant cost reduction gained to be held when you look at, remote workstations versus having laptops or, desktops on-prem in the offices. Okay, so just a quick use case here that what we've seen working very well, again, just to reiterate, my love for VDI and desktop as a service. So a major client of ours, a large engineering consulting company based in Europe, they've gone down this VDI path, really simple. For them, it's anytime and anywhere, right? As I talked about earlier, those high demand applications, being able to work on projects in locations without any office. It's flexibility, so at any time a user can be able to increase the computing power for a workplace on demand like that. There's security there, so it's a simple platform as a service. So it's compliant with many of the cybersecurity standards that exist today, right? You have further technical insights, automated reporting and tooling, workflow insights, so integrated workflows around clear, transparent insight in user needs and cost. And then ultimately, with a lot of these VDI solutions, it's a pay-as-you-go, right? Pay per user, pay as you go. So instead of, again, having to invest in refreshing of laptops and a lot of physical devices, right, you can reduce that footprint and basically deliver these capabilities. Another example too, in this remote working use case environment. So, we also cross many different services, clients, and verticals. Working with an oil field services company, basically they had to move like somewhere upwards of 2,000 of their staff to be telecommuting in days. We were able to, activate very quickly using something like Cisco Jabra soft phones, so they can minimize work stoppage. So just another quick example of, use case. So with that, let me pause, Ferris, because I know I talked for a good bit. Any questions out there?
Yep, we have a couple of questions. The first one is actually about remote working. We know that remote working is here to stay, and this is gonna definitely change the way that IT organization are gonna be looking at their infrastructure, right? So what is the impact on the land, and does that need to be transformed to be able to use these solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually didn't cover that in my slides, but yeah, let's talk about the land. So I'll give an example or a view from some of our partners. So HP Aruba and Cisco Meraki realized that working in the working environment is changing significantly. And what they're doing is they're actually building like these remote working as a service offerings and basically building and taking the land and extending it to the home edge, right? So the land is no longer just the your office, but actually a home office, right? Not a physical enterprise office, it's the home office. It's interesting, we were talking to one of our key clients and they said now that we have this new pandemic and outbreak and I have people working from home, I used to have 1,000 physical locations. Now I have 300,000 locations because I have to serve all of my remote workers and users. So I think the land is becoming more important and we're seeing that trend. We should be working with our clients, and also it's changing what the land is and defining, which I think is also excellent. So another challenge before was, right, if someone is working from home and they're on a VPN, how does the IT team troubleshoot or support that, right? And so again, with working with like an Aruba or a Meraki, right, there is types of connectivity so you can actually connect back into an organization and get visibility back into that land location, i.e. your home office, to be able to provide work and continue to work. So
So
excellent,
that, Rob,
great question though.
yeah, absolutely great question. A second question for you. It's a little bit different, right? So do you think that people's digital mindset will also be an issue for us to evolve to a digital society? How do we break these barriers without being invasive? It goes along with the digital transformation and how the pandemic has triggered the acceleration of the digital transformation for the enterprises.
Yeah, so how do we break the digital mindset? It's tough, right? It's a lot of organizations they have the policies and structures and procedures, and ultimately it's having agile and having agility. And so, agile method development, Scrum. There's different methodologies for embracing and evolving what you need to do in the services you deliver. I think we need to really look at those and bring those to the forefront. So as we are creating new services, as we are transforming our business and organizations, right, we actually leverage that. I talked a little bit about design thinking before. That's another key way, right? Again, we need to think a little creatively, think outside the box, and then have a good methodology behind it. So if we do create something new, right, how do we have an environment for testing and production and piloting, right? And then doing things like, sampling, right? So roll out to a small location, see the impact, and then basically gradually improve, right? So having an iterative development enablement process for companies is helpful.
Perfect. I'm actually having a last question for this section because it's also related to remote working. Can we say that the advancement in virtual reality technologies can improve the efficiency of remote working, considering the economic factors and the security threats? I know you have a couple of use cases on that.
Yes, yes, yes. AR, VR is significantly going to be more and more pervasive. It started for some organizations like in HR, so I'll give a good example. So of our innovation gardens, innovation labs are in Silicon Valley. They actually have created an AR, VR solution where it's helping HR organizations. So if you have a new hire, right, and they come aboard, and you need to train them and understand what are the safety hazards, what are the drills, instead of and they need to work from a certain location, right? They're able to they built an application, apply it, and basically that new employee can go put on the AR, VR headset and understand how do they run like a fire drill, fire safety hazard, right? So it's a new way for applying new differentiating ways of looking at and understanding what services are needed, right? And it's also a good way of understanding how to help transform what the day-to-day functions are. And then you see, it's very pervasive in different verticals and industries too, right? Of understanding of, how do you provide experience, right? So if it's like a business continuity situation, right? A critical urgent situation, right? You can actually run through that situation, prepare your team, whether it's a NOC or a SOC or, any of your leadership team for that matter, right? And help to simulate something without actually putting anyone in danger. So it's also a good lever for risk mitigation.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob.
Awesome. Great questions. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So moving on to the next slide, very quickly here. This is all about just, again, increasing business efficiency. It's establishing technology scalability and then pushing things out to the cloud. A lot of different technology enablers. None of these should be shockingly new. I think what is important, though, when you see those enablers on the slide, is that working together and in concert and in unity, right? They're really going to deliver and differentiated value. So connectivity no longer is the days of purely MPLS, where most all organizations connect to MPLS, that's gone, right? We now have internet as being more and more prevalent as a low-cost option alternative. We have 5G, the horizon of 5G, and what that is. There's smart cities, smart building use cases, so different means for connectivity via 5G. On the land side, we have things like Wi-Fi 6. So there's a lot of different ways to drive improved acceleration of connectivity between a person and an application in the cloud. That would be point one, I would say. On the SDN, so the software-defined networking front, obviously just continuing to leverage and tap into things like, virtual network functions, universal CPE, so boxes, basically white boxes where you can reduce your actual footprint, right? So instead of needing to have maybe an acceleration device or a router, right, collapsing that down, so streamlines your costs, reduces footprint, but ultimately, again, providing more software-driven capabilities. Further to that, APIs. So more and more, as we get more and more cloud-driven and cloud-centered and software-driven, APIs and embracing and adopting APIs, whether it be via open source or if you're, again, looking at some of our great partners, right, they have like these entire development platforms and environments for us to tap into. We shall be taking advantage of that, but ultimately embracing that API model. The other thing I'd say on APIs too, what we're seeing is a shift from, instead of organizations being just technology centered, so the number of CCIEs or specific technical certifications, we're seeing more embracing and bringing aboard software development teams and entities, right? And people who understand the different protocols for doing the data integration between different applications and tools. Multi-hybrid cloud, also very important as well. And so as you have all these different cloud models and environments, and as a service models and platforms as a service or infrastructure, et cetera, that multi-hybrid cloud becomes more and more prevalent. So we need to better manage that and control that. Right? Simple example is, how do you ensure compliance? So as your applications are going from on-prem out to an Azure, an AWS, or GCP, right? We need to control that. We need to make sure it's secure. Underpinning that as well, as you move to the cloud, your assets and what your assets are and where they sit also changes, right? So you need to relook at your landscape of what are the different assets I have and how do I actually control and manage those. And then data and analytics, very, very important too. So it's looking at it more from an angle of continuing on like an end user experience perspective of, what is the experience? So if I, historically had an application, it was going from a branch office to a data center, now it's going to the cloud. Is my application fit for purpose? And what is the experience that I'm having with that, right? Again, a lot of new emerging tools and capabilities in the marketplace that companies can tap into around that. And also behind that, with those analytics, better visibility and understanding like workloads, right? And how do you optimize those workloads as they are traversing to these different types of domains? And the last thing I call out here too, kind of circling around all this when we look at the cloud, is organizations relooking at their application portfolio, right? And understanding what applications they have and what they need to modernize and what applications and what is the migration strategy behind that. So putting some effort around what is that stack of applications and how do I unify all my applications together, right? That's really critical if you're going to be starting to move more and more capabilities and workloads to the cloud. So moving on to the build out there. So some of those business outcomes I think are very straightforward here that you can achieve. Obviously, flexibility and scalability with cloud solutions, delivering that modern on-demand. Obviously, when you move things to the cloud, that consumption model, utilization model, better visibility in what you're consuming, and then also easier metrics or levers for metering and billing, right? So that helps to drive levels of resiliency and cost optimization. Obviously, elasticity. So as workloads expand and contract, you can manage that. And as I said, all this pulled together means that you're evolving your entire application space and driving that cost reduction optimization. So I'm going to move on to the next characteristic. So this is all about improving customer centricity and brand empathy, as I talked earlier. And what it really means is truly listening to your customers and responding to them, and responding very quickly, right? There's many different techniques and areas for companies to focus on. First, I'll start with number 2. I think it's very important and also very underappreciated is the digitalization of your services catalog, right? What are the services you deliver internally? What are the services you deliver to your end users, your business units, or ultimately your customers, right? And be able to digitize that. There are large and very prevalent, ITSM platforms out there in the marketplace, like a ServiceNow, where they're able to help drive that digitalization. And then further behind that, once you actually start to deliver that digitalization, you also can automate that, right? So you have some savings and gains. And it's also a means to better present and demonstrate and articulate what the services are that you have to offer, right? So it reduces that veil of misunderstanding. If I talk about customer, I'll move around the clock, I guess, a little bit. So I'll talk about customer experience by number 3. Also very, very, very important, right? So customer experience is becoming more and more significant. Again, I'll give a partner example. So like any of our software companies and software partners, like a Palo Alto or a Zscaler or a Cisco, right? They're seeing more and more focus of it's not just about selling a piece of software, but there's an entire life cycle of services and capabilities that really truly deliver the value of that software and truly deliver customer experience, right? So that's, I think, a very, very important area for investigation, right? And that's, it connects back to what I said earlier on that learning and agile company, where things like adoption services. So if you do buy this large software package, are your teammates using and utilizing that, right? What are the things you can do to incent them to use the right features and functions? Or maybe regionally your teams aren't adopting or embracing certain software capabilities in one theater or another, right? And so you can actually put programs in place to help reinforce and help incite and drive that organizational change. Analytics, again, all this is important for us to understand what's going on, what's happening. Moving up to AI, chatbots, and contact center, also very, very important, right? And so this is really truly about, delivering and establishing that omni-channel communication path, right? And so it's, whether it's internal or external, it's driving, enabling the alerting, the notification, updating employees or customers, delivering that through text, social media, or even traditional email. And then from a contact center perspective, we're at a good inflection point too, where organizations can look at what they have today, which is legacy on-prem contact centers, and start to look at migrating them to cloud-based environments, right? And you can do that without preventing any business disruption. And so, from that, when you migrate to the cloud, what does that also do? It frees up organizations to be able to allow their contact center people and resources to work anywhere, right? They can work remotely. So you don't have to have all of them, focused and centered into one geographic location, right? So you ultimately have resiliency by having that dispersed workforce. Okay. You also have things like, interactive voice response, text to speech, speech recognition, right? There's AI capabilities. So when you invest in different AI tools in chatbots, right, you can drive, simple things like frequently asked questions. So if you do have a spike in a challenge or a concern, or during the pandemic, how does your HR team or your help desk handle that, right? Chatbots is a simple, quick, easy way to address that. And oftentimes for a lot of organizations with having a contact center or a front-end service desk, right, they may be charged or billed by the ticket, by the incident, by the call. So having these chatbots can actually reduce your cost of even needing to front-end that support. And building that out, so basically, some of the key outcomes, once you have that digital front end, you have that services catalog, right? You have better intimacy of what the customer is trying to do and what they want to do, right? You're going to improve your online sales clearly, increasing customer satisfaction, right? Better digital service adoption, right? More interactive engagement for clients and for users and for customers to understand what you have. And then better trending, right? Predicting of what their behaviors are, right? So again, with these analytics I talked about, right? What's the forecast? Are they buying, consuming certain set of services, right? Do I need to invest or evolve my portfolio of services in a different manner so that my organization can adjust to what my clients are looking for? Okay, so I'm going to move on to this next slide here, just a little quick graphic. The other thing I'd like to call it here is really, I think, when we talk about experience. Before it was just about customer experience. Now there's many different avenues of experience. Companies now looking at employee experience, right? And so again, how do you scale up and down so your employees can work remotely, like I talked about many times. Customer experience, obviously, front-ending that, delivering them the services to collaborate, communicate, but also operational experience, that is becoming important, and then IT experience. And then there's the convergence of IT and OT. So with all these things coming together, you really need to truly have an experience framework, right? An understanding of connecting all these different little ecosystems together and having these appropriate touch points so you understand whether it is, client experience driven or operational experience driven, that you have visibility to what those needs are. Okay, excellent. Moving on to the next slide. So becoming risk resilient. This is all about security. A lot of key concepts here that I'll talk about, but I'll actually build this out just from an outcome perspective. When you see the enablers, it's about zero trust. So ultimately, everything you do should have I shouldn't let people into my network or devices or items into a network until I trust them, right? And then having that level of trust and validation will help you, fundamentally secure and understand what is going on. Next is endpoint and cloud security. So I think what's also interesting this time here is no longer just about the perimeter, but managing the cloud. I talked a little bit about cloud and what that means and pushing things to cloud, but also endpoint and then the edge, right? So as you do have an extended partner ecosystem of clients, and then you have maybe an industrial supply chain, so you have this IT/OT convergence, the edge continues to evolve and grow. And so, really putting in strong effort and focus and program around things like endpoint detection. SASE is a key term that a lot of companies are figuring out what that means and how to embrace that. But ultimately, you need to really figure out where edge is and start from that ending point to secure backwards into the core of your company, whether it's the applications, etc. The other thing that I think is important to call out here on this slide is this is a great time for, business continuity and disaster recovery refresh, right? So we need to adapt, right? We should be looking at and learning from what we went through, and is this going to be a common, more, consistent kind of a challenge that we're all collectively faced with? Then we should be refreshing, understanding what is, the need for our continuity plans, right? Do we need to redefine the strategy? Is there better definition of analysis needed to be done, right? Do we need to look at business impact against what is happening? What are the right design scenarios? And then ultimately, what are the change management and various programs I can put in place to grow and evolve, right, and maintain that security? And then lastly is security training and awareness, right? Security should be at the forefront. We should be constantly training and providing awareness to organizations internally and to our partners and to our ecosystem of, our policies, our controls, our procedures, understanding regulatory and legal changes, right? Having that awareness. We're seeing companies in certain sectors, industries, having actually dedicated teams just purely focused on looking at the new changes from regulatory and a legal perspective, and what is the impact, and how does that impact globally, right? So not just in one region, but across the entire globe. So a lot of key enablers there, and then you see on the right-hand side of the slide, very important requirements to address. Obviously, understanding those regulatory requirements, getting in front of them. You don't want to go into compliance jail, right? Dealing with any fines or any issues or challenges there. With the security first framework, right? Being able to solidify what your infrastructure looks like, demonstrate due diligence and care, etc. If I move on to the next slide, I'm going to really problem statement this out a little bit. It's interesting because a lot of organizations, they still look at security from a silo perspective. Very, very recent and interesting study done by EY here, you'll see, where they're not looking at security or cybersecurity at the very front end of their business initiatives, right? And so what we need to do collectively is we need to help continue to push that number. So not only be 36% of organizations include cybersecurity teams and business initiatives, we need to raise that number up, right? Because ultimately, it's this transversal strategic capability. The other thing I'd say too, just looking at some common trends we're seeing as we support global multinationals, digital transformation requires security. It requires it to be a critical element of the discussion. We at Orange, right, we do quite a bit of software-defined network transformations and SD-WAN transformations of clients, and most oftentimes security is the #1 decider or the critical element to determine what they're going to do or how they're going to do it. So let's get in front of that, right? Let's understand how we can better augment that and supplement all these digital transformation capabilities with a security first kind of a framework and model. Then moving on to the next slide, just a very simple example in what we've seen is, again, applying that integrated transversal set of services. And so this, I'll just leave this slide as a leave behind for people to read, but ultimately it's applying security across the entire lifecycle, right? We within Orange, we look at security from a NIST risk lifecycle, right? And we look at that as, embracing and adopting our portfolio. And a lot of companies should do that too, right? Anticipate, detect, respond, right? And that's really the core tenets of the NIST risk lifecycle. And these are just the different elements, but ultimately it's not looking at these in siloed, disparate views, but connecting them together. Okay, so let me pause again for a quick question if I could, Ferris.
Yep, we only have one question, and it relates to what you mentioned around security, right? So we saw a lot of, we know that a lot of enterprises have a very static security posture, right? So basically, we know that they're not going to be able to change the policies overnight, right? So how do we convince InfoSec and the security organization to change them?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think we need to use this, where we are today and the challenges we have as an opportunity. We need to relook at what are our business requirements, right? Ultimately, policies and procedures and controls should be driven by business requirements, right? We need to, again, take a step back and look at and understand what are the new business requirements, right? When those policies and changes and controls and procedures, whatever, were set, maybe they were set 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, right? We were in a completely different world. And so we, as leaders and thought leaders, we need to go back and understand and sit down collaboratively with our security teams and understand and say, look, right, the world has changed. We have changed. How we need to apply security. And if some of those enablers I talked about on the other slide, like zero trust and SASE and things like that, we need to incorporate that in, right, because again, the threat landscape has completely changed. And so I think we really need to just logically take a step back, look at that element, and then reinforce again, where's your business going? And one of the things I'd say from a security policy definition perspective, it's good to review them periodically, very periodically, right? Whether it's every 6 months or every year, and then drive those changes because your business is changing, accelerating in change compared to what it was doing, 5, 10 years ago.
Thanks, Rob.
Awesome. Okay. All right, so in the final stretch here, so the fifth characteristic for risk resiliency, it's about controlling costs. I talked about many different avenues of cost, controlling around remote access, pushing things to the cloud, et cetera, improving contact center experience. So let me just call it 2 more, I think, that are really, really important here. And it's really connected to items number 3 and number 4, right? So from an internal perspective, right, a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning can be, you can take advantage of that. We're seeing an explosion around AI ops and being able to drive, reduction of noise and improvement of things like mean time to repair, mean time to respond. Very simply, a statistic I've seen, most global organizations have somewhere in the upwards of 30 to 40 different monitoring tools without a clear, consistent event management strategy, right? So they don't do things like event consolidation, event correlation, et cetera. So doing something like introducing AI ops, very, very simple, very effective way to reduce a lot of the noise, help you prioritize and understand what truly are the incidents, right? And then focus on that. And then the good thing too is not only is it about reducing the noise, but again, there's an element of machine learning behind that. So, you can start to be predictive. I can start to see the trends and understand before I even get to an incident, what I can do to proactively improve the posture of my infrastructure, my environment. So that's AIOps. Very simple, and again, a partner of ours like Moogsoft, really great tools. Splunk, another great technology enabler that has AIOps built within it. So we need to really look at that, revisit that, and build our IT operational strategy to include that. Then the other area I call it here is underneath number 3, which is multi-sourcing service integration. This is truly a huge challenge for a lot of organizations. I'll actually just build out this slide here. a lot of organizations have many different suppliers, right? They have many different siloed, horizontal different technology domains, right? They may have 2 or 3 MPLS or internet providers. They may have someone supporting their security environment. Ultimately, a lot of inefficiencies in that. So there's an emerging trend, a lot of focus, and Gartner's actually put out more and more white papers over the past couple of years around MSI and be able to embrace that, right? And so by taking all these different disparate things and connecting them together and driving that multi-sourcing integration, you're able to do things like streamline your processes, drive standardization. Oftentimes, clients have the challenge where they may have, again, a service delivered from one service desk from one provider, internet connectivity from another, SD-WAN solution from another. You need to connect those together. They have all these disparate SLOs and As, and they don't connect together from an end-to-end perspective, right? And so leveraging something like MSI, you can start to drive that standardization and consistency, right? Having higher levels of tooling, right? Making sure that regardless of the number of supplies you have, right, are they embracing and adopting the same standard process framework, right? I talked a little bit about an ITSM platform earlier, but that's another key area. So looking at, your ITSM platform, how do you actually get every one of your partners or suppliers, right, to leverage that platform, right? Be able to tap into your common tool set, leverage those workflows. Also within MSI is monitoring and analytics again. So connected very closely to the AIOps, but having one integrated monitoring framework also important. So you can start to see that end-to-end visibility. So it's not just about an incident on the LAN or on the WAN, but it's about, how does my laptop sitting in my home office here today connect back up to the cloud? What does that experience look like? Also within MSI is something around lifecycle and contract management, right? So having governance around just looking at the different costs and of doing cost deduplication, cost avoidance, right? And then cleaning up the different contracts that you have in place. A lot of effort, a lot of savings can be gained by that. And then lastly, within MSI, it's governance. How do you actually have regionalization and scalability of governance between what you're doing in one location versus what you can do in another location? And then the very last element, what we typically see is around having a consultative mindset, right? So auditing, doing regulatory compliance reviews, right? Providing recommendations, delivering a roadmap, right? And what we typically see too within MSI, by driving that consolidation, you drive standardization. That's kind of step one, right? Once you have that standardized, consolidated environment across the different suppliers and across tools and processes, then you can more effectively digitally transform your environment, right? Because you have that consistent footprint, and it's a lot easier from an organizational or technology change perspective. And then just quick reference here, an example. So, we obviously work in this MSI space. We are very strongly, proponents of it and helping our clients that are global in nature, right, with many, many different locations and sites and suppliers. Just a quick reference case study here. This client of ours, they had somewhere upwards of 900 or so locations, many different suppliers. Ultimately, we became a governing arm for them, consolidate a lot of that, and one of the end net results from a cost reduction, network flexibility, is we're able to improve their service management and operating costs somewhere in the range of 20%, right? So some really, really strong and good returns can be had by really starting to streamline, right, how these services come together and how they get integrated together. And then just wrapping up here, so this is the end of my presentation, and then I'll turn back to Ferris if there's any other questions, but really just pulling it all together, I covered the 5 different characteristics for resilient organizations, as you see here. Ultimately, what does that do? It addresses these risks you see down the bottom of the slide, right? So from financial risk perspective, the continuing automation of business processes, increasing of operational margins, acceleration of cloud transformations to help keep costs under control, rethinking how your IT infrastructure needs to be and how it becomes more IT flexible, and IT agile, right? From an operational risk perspective, right? Again, bringing more agility, bringing more visibility into your supply chain, introducing those new technologies, connecting those cloud platforms, those applications, extending it out to the edge, right? And having that visibility, right? Considering new ways, resilience of, how your users are engaging, right? And operationally how you support them. And then, ensuring cybersecurity throughout the entire value chain. And then lastly, demand, right? So again, becoming customer-centric is absolutely critical. Building that unified data insight, across all channels, right? One dashboard to rule them all, right? We all hear of the single pane of glass dream. It's coming back, right? Again, with these business intelligence platforms we have, whether it's via companies like Click or Tableau, et cetera, right? We have the tools to be able to provide these analytics and insights and take action against it. And ultimately, when you do that, the demand and understanding your client, you can be more responsive, more fast changing, and aligned to their expectations. So that's all I had to cover. I greatly appreciate everyone being part of their presentation. Thank you for joining. Ferris, thank you very much for helping to moderate and address these questions. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention as well that we have additional upcoming webinars. Please go to our LinkedIn, to our social media pages and our websites, or reach out to myself or Ferris and the Orange team to get more information. But we look forward to having you as part of our other webinar series. So thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.